So, Promethium Science makes science more sciencey? How the heck does that work? What is Promethium Science?
At the end of the space age expansion, you learn how to make Promethium Science.
This is a unique science in that it increases the productivity of your science labs and biolabs.
And that's it. You can't use Promethium Science to do any other research, just science productivity.
That makes it the most powerful science pack, since it makes all other research cheaper, but it also makes it the most limited, and this then suggests it has some special properties.
For some reason, it's different to all the other science packs. So, what is this Promethium Science Pack? How can you even research a way to make research itself more productive?
Surely that's like researching knowledge itself, and somehow spawning more knowledge. Is that even possible? If so, how?
In this video, which is the last part of a short series on the nature of Promethium and Promethium Science Packs, I'm going to look at these questions and more. But first off, I think I need to do a quick recap of what I've already covered.
If you remember those videos, or perhaps you've just watched them in a playlist, hint hint, then the timestamp on screen will let you skip to the new stuff. The biters.
In my What's Up with the Biters video, I proposed the idea that the biters are artificial, seeded onto Nauvis by the engineer's people.
My reasoning was that their behaviour is very weird, and that their rate of growth and evolution is off the charts. I concluded that they're a species the engineers have either created,
or, more likely, adapted to study the core principles of life: evolution, change, and adaptation. Life finds a way, if you will.
Promethium. In my Why Shatter a Planet video, I proposed the idea that Bob, my name for the shattered planet, is a rogue planet that has been drifting through the cosmos for untold millennia.
In that video, I concluded that the Promethium was the reason Bob was shattered.
Then, in my What Even Is Promethium video, I proposed the idea that the Promethium had been produced during this time in the void.
I suggested that it was created by Bob absorbing and interacting with cosmic rays.
Yes, it was all very old school Stan Lee. This absorbing of cosmic rays has slowly turned the core of Bob into an enormous mass of promethium. Promethium is a unique element that doesn't have any stable isotopes. It also has a short half-life, which means that it's not usually found naturally in high quantities.
I'll be honest, I didn't have a great explanation as to why the promethium in Bob was still there. By rights, it should have decayed away, so I just kind of fudged the issue and said that in the Factorio universe, one promethium isotope does have a long half-life.
That way it can still retain this unique property of promethium, but it's also still there after all this time.
Okay, so that's all the background stuff. For this video, I'd like to start off by discussing the final ingredient in Promethium Science: quantum processors.
Quantum processors. These are, I assume from the name, circuits that perform quantum computing.
I think it's worth explaining quantum computing a bit, but I'm not going to get sidetracked into explaining it in any depth. What matters for this discussion is that to perform calculations, quantum computing uses some quantum mechanical effects which have some cool names: superposition, entanglement, and decoherence, to name but three.
A classical computer, like the one you're probably sat next to while watching this video, or taking a dump while staring at it if it's your phone I guess, uses transistors to flip bits between 0 and 1.
Note that only having two values, 0 and 1, is why it's called binary.
Combinations of these bits represent numbers or letters. In a string of binary, each bit is used to turn on and off a power of 2 that's then summed, in essence. Because everything can be reduced to a number, you can therefore use a computer to do maths and manipulate things. Binary maths is actually really simple, though it can be a bit long-winded when done manually.
This is why speed matters for computers. Although the operation might be time-consuming for a person to do, computers can run at huge speeds and do lots of stuff in parallel as well, so they're quick from our perspective.
Classical computers are therefore generally all about brute forcing things. Throw more computers at it and it gets faster. That's why a large language model, LLM, needs a huge, power-hungry data center, it's large remember, to do something your tiny squishy meat brain can do without you even really having to think about it.
Instead of this, a quantum computer replaces these regular bits with something called a qubit, which is simply short for quantum bit. These are similar to regular bits because they have a limited range of 0 to 1.
But they are also very different in that they exist in a state where they are, in a sense, both 0 and 1 at the same time. Where it gets really funky is that they are also neither 0 nor 1 all at the same time as well.
As I say, it's quantum mechanical, and that means everything is probabilistic. It's neither 1 nor 0, but also both all at the same time.
Okay, but how does this actually work? Well, imagine multiplying several large numbers together.
For a classical computer, you need to perform the appropriate mathematical operation on every digit in sequence.
So, if you're trying to maths a lot of very big numbers, you need to do a lot of calculations and you have to do them step by step. As I said before, a computer can do it quicker than a person because it's running super fast and doing things in parallel. But if the numbers are really big, it still takes a very long time.
For a quantum computer, you can essentially shortcut the process.
If you can devise an appropriate algorithm, then you can cause those qubits to shift into the correct 0 and 1 states together. Note that an algorithm is just a fancy term for doing a set of steps in sequence. It's working out these steps that makes quantum computing difficult, but it's also what gives it its power.
In other words, with a quantum computer, you can shift from having to laboriously go through every single step to doing a few steps that sort of massage out the answer all at once.
I'm simplifying things and using some very weird terminology there, but hopefully you get the point. For certain problem types, quantum computing lets you get to the answer quicker.
But the kicker is that while I think the speed boost is important, I don't think it's what we're really harnessing in Promethium Science. I think it's the quantum weirdness.
Quantum weirdness on toast.
When you get down to subatomic scales, the classical Newtonian mechanics that we're all familiar with is not a useful way of describing things.
For example, you've probably seen an atom represented with these planet-like pictures. This depicts a set of globes with the neutrons and positively charged protons all clumped together in the central nucleus. The negatively charged electrons rotate around the nucleus like planets going around the sun. It's a very classical view of the world and leans on our everyday experiences. You know about balls, you know about suns and planets and moons, so you know how atoms work, right?
No. Atoms aren't actually like that. Nothing is solid and everything is probabilistic at the atomic scale.
Electrons in particular are fuzzy blobs of probability. They only have a single position, like this diagram implies, when you measure them. This feature, where it's only like that when you measure it, leads to a temptation to dismiss the quantum mechanical part of it.
It's very tempting to apply normal logic like, oh, they are balls, it's just we don't know where they are, so it becomes a probability. But no, that's not what the science tells us.
Electrons are not a tangible thing until you force them to be. They're a smushed out ball of probability. And there's all sorts of consequences to that, as well as the many other things that quantum mechanics says. And unfortunately, almost every one of them are counterintuitive. Nobody understands quantum mechanics indeed.
Anyway, what does all this mean for Promethium Science? It means uncertainty, the unknown, chaos, a sea of probabilities with no single answer until you determine that answer. That's what quantum processors are there to represent.
So the ingredients are all allegories then?
One of the things I've discussed before is that the science packs are allegorical.
They're not like making a cake. You're not mixing flour and eggs and sugar together and baking it to make a cake.
A science pack is more abstract.
You're shoving a whole cake in, and maybe a pastry and a cookie too, because you're taking the essence of baked goods and using that to research, I don't know, muffins or something like that. It's definitely not lunchtime.
The science in Factorio is more like being inspired to do a new thing by an old thing.
And as I've discussed before, I think it's not so much that you're describing the concept of a fast transport belt, so much as you're working out how to make a fast transport belt given your available resources.
Either way, I think you can see where I'm going with this. If quantum processors represent uncertainty and the unknown, what do the other two ingredients represent?
The biters are life itself. Growth, change, evolution. You can watch my biter video for a deeper dive on that. Pluggety plug. And promethium, an element that has no stable isotopes and must therefore decay into something else, is entropy.
Okay, that one might feel like it came a bit out of nowhere since I didn't really mention entropy that much in that video. So what do I mean?
Well, entropy is a measure of the availability of energy in a system to do useful work.
That's a bit technical, so I'll explain what I mean. Entropy is a way of measuring the disorder in a system, a bit like how much it's decayed.
Let's think about a cup of coffee. Coffee. The temperature or heat of that coffee represents a concentration of energy. The energy is more ordered because it is all concentrated in a small area. If we wanted to do something useful with that energy, we could hook it up to a heat engine to harness it.
An example of this is the Stirling engine.
However, over time, the heat dissipates, being lost to the atmosphere and the surface it's sat on, for example. This is the entropy increasing. The energy in the system is becoming less ordered, such that we cannot now harness it. Note that something called the second law of thermodynamics says entropy cannot ever decrease, only increase. And as such, eventually the coffee reaches equilibrium, the same temperature, with the surroundings, and the entropy of the system reaches its maximum.
Not being a fan of cold coffee, you may think, well, I'll stick it in the microwave for a minute and warm it back up. For our simple analysis, this might initially seem to break that second law.
We've increased the concentration of energy in the cup, making that energy more ordered, right? Entropy has gone down, yes?
Well, in a sense, yes, but we've done that by increasing the entropy somewhere else. Off in some dim and distant power plant somewhere, some natural gas has probably been burnt to make the electricity that was used to power the microwave.
This generation process will also have heated a bunch of air at the same time as our cup, creating a net increase in the total entropy of that complete system. It's complicated, in other words, because you have to look at the whole system in totality.
Okay, enough with the science lessons. How does all of this relate to Promethium Science?
Well, the ultimate consequence of this ever-increasing entropy is that the total system entropy of the whole universe must always be increasing, and there is a theoretical maximum. This is cheerily referred to as the entropy heat death of the universe, when all energy is completely diffused and no useful work can be extracted. Everything is in equilibrium and everything is dead.
And so, a way of interpreting entropy is that it is a measure of death.
Well, it's how I want to interpret it for this video nonsense anyway.
Therefore, measuring entropy is a way of measuring death, the natural endpoint for all systems.
Remember that promethium is an element that has no stable isotopes. It cannot, by definition, exist at the end of the universe.
So the engineer is perhaps measuring the entropy of the universe by studying it as a part of Promethium Science. Promethium is the ingredient that represents decay.
The cycle.
Where am I going with all this? I'm guessing I've lost at least half of you by now with my injections of some pseudoscience rubbish into my actual science.
But, for me, the ingredients for Promethium Science are analogies for the natural processes that make up the universe.
Quantum processes represent potential, the unknown and the possibility of anything happening.
It is the beginning. If the universe is truly infinite, then all things that can happen must happen.
Biters, and especially their eggs, represent growth, development, evolution, and the unique type of ordering that life brings.
Only life has the capability to evolve, to adapt to its surroundings. Only life has the capacity to understand. Information, or knowing things, is a quality only life can have. In the case of biters, for example, they somehow know about pollution and what causes it. They then evolve to adapt to it.
Promethium represents decay, entropy as the measure of death. And if we loop that around, then we have a sort of cycle, one that represents the processes of the universe itself.
Birth from chaos and the unknown, a crystallization from possibility to actuality. Growth, evolution, change, understanding, knowledge, and then death, decay, passing from order to chaos.
The chaos from which life is born, and so we go back around again.
So, what is Promethium Science?
Promethium Science is an allegory for the very concept of existence itself. It is reality, life, the universe, and everything, all packaged up into a weird black liquid.
It's a bizarre soup of the unknown, evolution, and entropy. By studying it, the engineer is able to unlock the very secrets in the universe itself, to look upon the ultimate mystery and, piece by piece, drop by drop, understand how it all works. That's how Promethium Science leads to improvements in science.
In some way, it means the engineer is able to understand the questions they're asking,
not just the answers he gets. The engineer can thereby eke out ever more information from every other science pack.
The more the engineer knows, the more the engineer is able to know.
And the ever-escalating costs of the science is the realization that the more I learn, the less I know.
Or it's some black goop in a bottle that you feed to a captive biter nest to make science number go up. Either's good.
That got a bit philosophical. I guess you can see why I felt I needed to build up to it. I confess this was originally the last of the law speculation videos that I had originally planned. The biomass video was extra, but I had about 8 to 10 video ideas that I'd thought of when I started this series, and this is the last of that original set. I've definitely got one more on Volcanus and another mapping out the complete timeline for Factorio pre-crash as I see it. That second one is a big topic, so I think actually it'll probably end up being several videos, but after that I think I've said all I originally wanted to say. Oh, and don't worry, I do have a few more possible topic areas, so I'm sure I can keep going for a while with these. But in the meantime, if there's anything you specifically wanted me to speculate about, then let me know in the comments. If you want to watch that complete set of law speculation videos, the playlist linked on the screen has them all. I wasn't intending this end ramble to be quite so introspective, so I guess let's end on a more positive note. Thank you all for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing on this weird nonsense. It's been an absolute pleasure to make these so far, and hopefully they're not over quite yet.